Welcome everybody to part 2 of our video blog series for ACE, the Alliance for a Clean Environment, and the ACE report. And we're going to be talking about in this segment the drinking water and groundwater as it's being affected by the nuclear power plant, by Limerick Nuclear Power Plant. I'm your host, Nick Lawrence, in case you're just joining us in this particular series, but we're doing a 4-part series on this, and I'm here with Dr. Lou Cuthbert from ACE, the Alliance for a Clean Environment. Lou, the Schuylkill River and the water that's in it.
Yeah, it doesn't get more vital or urgent than our water supply, Nick. And in a nutshell, this part of the series is going to make it pretty clear, I think, to our viewers that Exelon has just done unprecedented damage to the water supply in the region, affecting about 2 million people between Pottstown and Philadelphia. And the NRC has once again fallen asleep at the wheel. It's amazing these guys, don't wind up having a total wreck because they're driving blind or asleep most of the time. But they've just totally dismissed all of the damage that's been documented and verified and put on the record in terms of damage to the water. I think we've characterized this in some previous programming as a recipe for disaster, an accident waiting to happen, and I don't think there's any question about it. Most people are not aware of the fact, Nick, that when you take a look at what's happening at Limerick Nuclear Plant, they're just slowly but surely destroying the Schuylkill River. And the plant has 24 discharge points. We have some graphics to support this in the research and documentation, most of which comes out of records from Exelon and the NRC. So you're talking like 24 discharge points into waterways, and the one that's the largest is what's known as outfall 001. That's the big one that comes into the river and carries most of the worst damage to the river itself. But part of the problem here is that you have all of these discharge points and very little monitoring. 23 discharge points are monitored once a year, Nick. I don't know about you, but
once a year. That's it.
Once a year, yeah.
Okay.
They're treating this like inspecting your car once a year.
Right,
well,
exactly.
This is a little more lethal, than maybe a minor problem with a turn signal in a car. So 23 of the 24 are monitored once a year. The big one, the big discharge 001 is monitored twice a month. But they're not monitoring for most of the things that they should be monitoring for. They're not looking for most of the radiation. We'll get into some of the mechanics and specifics here, but this is a ticking time bomb. And the NRC has basically said, we don't see it, we're not aware of it, we're not concerned about it, we don't care about it, and we're not even going to consider it anything other than a small issue.
Hear no evil, speak no evil, and see no evil.
That's right.
And if you do those 3 things, evil doesn't exist.
Yeah. And the regulatory monkeys are alive and well at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yeah,
in our humble judgment.
So let's talk about, you say they're slowly destroying the river. Or surely destroying. How slowly, I don't know, because if all these things are true, then we are all at risk, and everyone down the line and future generations, all of those things all of us in that regard are at risk. So what are they throwing into the river?
Wow, this is a toxic witch's brew of epic proportions. This is unlike pollution that most people will ever even think about, much less take a close look at in their lifetime. What comes out of this plant basically into the water, all right, which is our topic for this segment. We're talking about radiation.
Right.
Probably 100 or so radionuclides, many of them with tremendously long half-lives and can do tremendous damage to human health and the environment. That's the big dog in the room. But in addition to that, we're talking about cooling tower toxics. You're talking a number of dangerous chemicals and pathogens that come out of those 2 towers at Limerick. Every time you see something coming out of there, guess what, folks? Contrary to what some of the morons at the NRC are likely to say to you that they've actually said previously, it's not just steam. And they've actually claimed in public meetings, Nick, oh, that's just like steam from a tea kettle.
Yeah, and that's amazing to me. But I think there probably are a lot of people who just believe it because it looks like steam.
Exactly.
It looks like a cloud, like a beautiful white cloud. So what could be in that, Lou?
Lots of bad stuff, Nick.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, lots of radiation, and a lot of this stuff is going into the river every day. So we're talking heated discharges, in excess of 100 degrees, 110 degrees. That's more than 20 degrees higher than the heat limit for the river. We had a graphic that showed a thermal image of what it looked like, from the air, the radioactive discharges from nuclear plants, and that's true for Limerick as well as the others that we've looked at. We're talking about a little more than 14 million gallons of discharge from Limerick into the river every single day, Nick. And it's heated and it's radiated. Plus there's some other things that we talked about, some of the other chemicals and pathogens that are also emitted. One of the things that was just kind of numbing to a lot of people was that in 2013, Limerick received a pollution permit without limits, basically a free pass to poison the river. And the explanation was that this is for the kind of discharges that will transport radiation and other toxics directly into the river, known as total dissolved solids, or TDS. And Exelon failed to meet existing standards. So
just change the standard.
Just change the permit. Just give them an exemption. You guys cannot meet this requirement, so we're
therefore we'll let you have
we'll
an
exempt you.
unlimited amount of money, water to go in, pollution to go into the river.
Precisely. So what we're saying is, they could filter this. They choose not to. That they don't want to spend the money. They're basically saying, public be damned. We don't care what happens to you or your children or your pets or your crops or any of that kind of stuff. So that's the discharges. There's another whole category here. We're talking about depletion also, Nick. Mm-hmm. There's like 4 big pieces to this puzzle. Depletion is a major concern. Anybody who lives in the Pottstown region knows that there's a lot of water being sucked out of that river and being spit into the sky. They withdraw a little over 58 million gallons of water every day, Nick. That's more than 2 times the total amount of water withdrawn for the Schuylkill River to serve Norristown, Pottstown, and Phoenixville water customers combined. So there's just an enormous draw of water, and they only return about a quarter of that back into the river. And what they do spit back in, is radiated and overheated.
So the difference between what's going back and what was taking out is what's in the steam? Is that part of it? Is it
largely.
Okay.
Yeah, largely. And it's a little more than steam.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
I'm going to say, because we talked about that. So
Yeah,
that means it's
exactly.
not, if what's coming out of that plant in the form of steam is toxic, as we know it is,
Right.
it's not staying on site, obviously.
Correct. Yeah, and part 3 is going to really hit that pretty hard, I
Okay.
think, with Donna. One of the things that we learned, I think, the hard way in this community is that, the longer you wait to speak up, the more damage is going to be done. So every day that this plant runs, it's going to be consuming water, depleting water, poisoning water, damaging water. And we've got a graphic that we've used before that I think just kind of says it all to a whole lot of people. It's a dried up riverbed, and the question is, do you want your local river to look like this?
Right.
Well, if we wait long enough, the Schuylkill is going to look like that. I just talked to somebody recently who said that they could literally walk across the Schuylkill River and only be ankle deep in water. And that was a part of the river where you needed to be in a canoe or a boat,
In past times.
In past times, just 2 years ago. So we're talking enormous damage. This plant's been operating since 1985, and by 1999, the Schuylkill River already had record low flows, and it hasn't gotten any better since '99. The third topic, basically, is the toxic mine water. We've talked about this in some of our previous blogs and programs over the years. The demonstration project that ran almost a decade for dumping toxic, contaminated mine water into the headwaters of the Schuylkill River at Wadesville was supposedly overseen by the Delaware River Basin Commission. They went through unbelievable gymnastics to allow Exelon to continue to do this. And they will allow it to continue into the future.
Which is an admission that there's not enough water in the Schuylkill River to support the plant because they have to put water in from some other source and are using this toxic mine water.
Bingo, Nick. You
That's
just
just a logical conclusion, isn't it?
exactly. There's water coming from other places,
Right.
including the Delaware River and Tamaqua reservoirs and some other places. So this monster, this gigantic dinosaur, is sucking up all the water that it can get. And this mine water contains some things that are problematic. I mean, some toxic chemicals, specifically manganese and iron. Iron at 20 times safe drinking water standards. 20 times
Wow.
safe drinking water standards. And DRB said, okay, go ahead. And manganese at 80 times safe drinking water standards. And they said, have at it, boys. Keep dumping as long as you want to. So the toxic mine water is going to continue to be used to feed the monster, to feed the dinosaur, so to speak, to feed the dragon, if you will. Limerick at this point is currently threatening the water supply across 6 different counties. And I'm sure we'll have a graphic on this, but Montgomery, Chester, Berks, Bucks, Schuylkill, and Philadelphia counties, all impacted by what Limerick nuclear plant does in terms of the water supply and the quality of the water. Once it leaves, the water supply is our major concern, because if this river goes, we're all in some very deep trouble.
I think a lot of times what happens is people see the plant in a single location, so they only think that around that location is what's truly impacted. You're talking about 6 counties. I can't even imagine the number of people that live in that 6-county area. Probably millions of people, right, that are affected by one plant that does that.
Exactly.
But we have about 3 or 4 minutes left in this segment. I know we have a lot to cover here, so I want to make sure you hit the high points before we have to go to our next series.
2 other points. Radioactive threats. The radiation released into the water obviously is a serious problem. We have a lot of information on our website about some of the impacts and some of the documented evidence and radiation being found, in fish, in sediment, in the river water, in Philadelphia's drinking water supply. This draft EIS from the NRC basically just ignores all this and says, no problem here. These are just small impacts, Nick. That seems to be their favorite word, small impacts. I mean, it's ridiculous. These are enormous impacts. And there's every reason to believe that if this continues unabated until 2029, or even worse, until 2049, there could be no water to serve the entire region. There's one other topic we want to talk about, and that's groundwater, Nick. Groundwater, groundwater is extremely important. There have been a lot of spills, including radioactive spills, leaks and spills into the groundwater under this site. The monitoring is basically non-existent. As we said in some previous programming, Exelon decides, what to monitor, how to monitor, where to monitor, when to monitor, and what to report. NRC says, okay, and just foists it. There are 46 domestic wells within 1 mile of this place. And this plant has already been documented to have had radioactive leaks into the ground. So what that means is health threats, and we'll get to that in part 4 of this series. You keep dumping and leaking radioactive water into the groundwater in the river, you're going to have some serious problems. You're going to have cancer and birth defect problems and a number of other things.
And we have to also, let people know over and over again that groundwater is not stationary either. It's not in one place. It follows the rock strata. It's all over the place. So if you have a pollution source right here, it seems to me that it's not going to stay there, because it's just going to go whatever the rock strata in the water, where the water tables go. So wells that are either farther away from the plant could be polluted as well. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're absolutely correct. It's a fractured bedrock aquifer, which means it'll go wherever it wants to go.
Right, exactly.
And in those 46 domestic wells, 13 of them are less than a mile from the reactor building.
Wow.
So anybody who says with a straight face not to worry, obviously, is suffering from some kind of dementia. So what we need to think about right now here is that there are all kinds of possibilities for breakdowns. We have a graphic that shows all the different ways and places and areas on the site where things can break down. There are miles of underground cables and pipes. Nobody has any idea what is going on with those. All we know for sure is it leaked before, and there's every reason to believe that it could be leaking today and that it will leak tomorrow. And when it does, it's radiation.
Right, and I don't know this, but there may be no way that they can tell what any of those pipes are doing until there's a major break and maybe comes to the surface or something like that. So who knows how much is actually leaking into the groundwater table?
Absolutely, and that's even more reason to close Limerick today. I mean, nobody can assure our safety. Exelon can't assure our safety. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission cannot assure our safety just on this topic. And this is one of maybe a dozen topics. This plant is a disaster waiting to happen. And if it happens while we're still here, you can say goodbye to any water supply that you have. Just think about this, Nick. Every homeowner in the region, every business owner in the region would have no water because Limerick has eminent domain. They can take all of it for as long as they want.
Well, so we're going to complete this second part. We talked about the groundwater. You certainly check out the acereport.org, right, for all this information. Lou, listen to this video blog series, and we're coming up with part 3 of our 4-part series on the EIS of the Limerick Power Plant.
Nick, if I may, throughout this whole series, we're going to be asking people to contact ACE, join ACE. The message is pretty simple: close Limerick.